Hello and welcome. My name is Kimberly Fairman. I'm very pleased to be hosting this webinar along with my fellow panelists on screen as part of Healthcare Excellence Canada's Spotlight series entitled Exploring Perspectives at the Crossroads of Climate Change and Health. So I'm the Executive Director at the Institute for Circumpolar Health Research and also a former member of HEC's Policy Circle. I'm hosting from my hometown in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, which is the traditional territory of the Yellowknife Standing First Nation and the Northside Métis. I myself am from Nunavut, but I've lived and worked in Yellowknife for many, many years. HEC's Spotlight series is a responsive webinar series that raises the voice of Canada's healthcare improvers and innovators to shed light on ways to address the most pressing challenges in healthcare across Canada. And we know that climate change is a threat with wide-ranging impacts on our health. Even while healthcare adapts to meet these needs and challenges, it also accounts for nearly 5% of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. In fact, last year, Canada formally committed to climate resilient and low carbon sustainable health systems under the COP26 health program to tackle these challenges. And across the country, we're seeing firsthand as well the ever greater frequency and intensity of climate changes, from wildfires in BC to flooding here in our own territory in Hay River this spring, and also some challenges in Winnipeg and Manitoba. We're also hearing more about what's been dubbed eco-anxiety among a variety of mental and physical health impacts of climate change. At the same time, there are bright spots across Canada and beyond, including how communities, sectors, and individuals are taking action, building resilience and adapting to climate change through innovation. In today's discussion, as is always the spirit of our Spotlight series discussions, we're hoping to both share and learn about promising initiatives, tools, and perspectives in this new space. Just a few housekeeping points before we dive in. So we're really pleased this morning to offer French simultaneous interpretation for this session. So if you wish to hear the voice of the interpreter, please select French from the interpretation menu at the bottom of your screen. We are going to invite you this morning to share your questions for the panelists in the question and answer feature from your Zoom toolbar. You can find that also at the bottom of your screen. We also invite you to add comments at any point using our chat box in either English or French. And we encourage all of you to share resources and respond to comments in the chat as you wish as we go along. So please note that this session is being recorded and the recording will be made available to all registrants within the coming week. If you need support at any time during this webinar, you can reach out to our tech support using the chat feature. So now to get the discussion started, I'm going to turn to each of our panelists for a round of introductions. And I would also encourage participants while we do that to take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat box if you haven't already done so. Before we go to the introductions, I am going to ask Elder Paulette to start us off with a prayer this morning.
I just ask you all just to pray in the best way that you know how. The very qui si on est dans pas qui si de ni pas de si qui si the house can come to see and to follow to see the new book you to see no skill. Other the very don't see no to saw on the other how no skill. Other no we don't know but don't know the sea and she picture on see the see the and then the skin see another than you see the one on the stir hot or channel and they must see. Thank you.
Let's see. And thank you for the prayer this morning. So beginning with our panelist, Sila Rogan, if you could take a few minutes to introduce yourself this morning.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sila, and I'm a second-year medical student at the University of British Columbia. I live, study, and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coast Salish nations. Outside of school, I'm interested in health, in the health of rural and remote communities across Canada, youth engagement in healthcare and decision-making, and the health impacts of climate change. I'd like to thank Health Excellence Canada for inviting me here today and for everyone for participating in this really important discussion. Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you, Sila. And Dr. Deering, if you could introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Kimberly. Really excited to be here. It's afternoon where I am in the Toronto area, and this area has been the home to many nations, including the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we're just so privileged to be able to live and work here. I have to say, so I'm a family doctor. I work in long-term care. And I've been concerned about climate change for decades, I'm sure like many of you, but have felt like I wasn't sure that I had a voice in my professional world. And that has changed in the last, I'd say, year and a half. And so I'll just tell you a little bit of my story. My personal life, my husband and I have made lots of conscious and intentional choices. We ride our bikes to work. We drive an electric car. We have solar panels on our roof. We're very privileged to be able to do those things. But at work, I wasn't really sure where, what my voice was. And about a year and a half ago, in the fall of 2020, there was a call inviting people to join a climate change community of practice at my university. And I jumped at the chance. And in the first meeting, I think, Dr. Kim Wintemute started to talk about the impact of metered dose inhalers, those little things that people use for asthma and things like that, Ventolin, for example, and how significant their impact is on greenhouse gases. I'd never heard of this before. A couple of weeks later, I was talking to a pharmacist colleague and asked her, she'd never heard of it before. And I thought, well, if nobody knows about this, how can we do anything about it? Many conversations started to happen. We started to do some work here in the long-term care home. And then fast forward a few months to the spring of 2021, and our department at the hospital hired a social accountability lead. And in chatting with her, I asked her, does social accountability include climate change? And she said, yes. So we started to have some more conversations, and I tell you, it has been a really exciting journey. We have gone from just me and just a couple of pharmacists and a few concerned people to we have now community family physician, the academic family health team, acute care, the respirology clinics in our hospital. We're hoping to expand to the rehab center and other acute care units. And our hospital has taken this issue of metered dose inhalers really to heart, and they have made it one of their quality priorities for this year, 2022-2023. And on Earth Day, I was appointed as one of 3 co-chairs for our new sustainability task force. And I saw at least one of our other members on the call today. It's been a really exciting journey. I still feel like I have so much to learn, but I'm really glad to be here today. And thank you for the opportunity to just continue the conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Deering. And now I'll turn to Elder Paulette to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his work in this area.
I am a retired traditional chief and leader. And today, my whole life and work is around the protection of Mother Earth and all living beings. I'm also a protector of womankind, that he continue to serve in a good way. I have traveled parts of the world and looking at climate change and what's going on there, and the impacts of more so the indigenous people. And I am an adjunct professor at the University of Alberta in the School of Public Health. My whole work has been around the rights of indigenous people, particularly the treaties. I have been a recipient of the Order of Canada for the work I have done in the past. And the treaties. I am a recovering alcoholic, 47 years. I'm a trained addictions counselor. I also have a diploma in social services. And I've also done a lot of work in cross-cultural interrelations work in the past, I think maybe 25, 30 years, and I still continue to do that. And my strength comes from my language. The language is the key to it. So looking at what's happening around us in the world, water, and the other one is my Binachan. It's a world that I live in. I don't live out of that. I live in that world. And I practice it to the best of my ability. I'm also known as a traditional practitioner. I'm a leader in that area. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Elder Paulette. I just want to pick up on a couple of things in your intro, Sila. You talked about rural health, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your motivation is and your interest in that, and how it's linked to climate change and how you see those things intersecting.
It's a really good question, Kimberly. So I was actually born in Iqaluit, and I have a lot of family that's up there. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that community, it's one of Canada's most northern communities. It's quite remote, but it's also an area that is warming at 3 times the rate of the rest of the country with respect to climate change. And I think that understanding how the healthcare system and how climate change has impacted that community based on personal experience and the experience of my loved ones, I think that's really informed my decision to get involved in this field. And then I guess with respect to how rural communities in Canada are being impacted by climate change, I get the sense that rural communities in Canada have a really strong connection to the land and are an immense source of knowledge for how our country is being impacted by climate change, but also given some of the differences in resources in rural communities versus urban centers in Canada and across the world will likely be disproportionately impacted by the impacts of climate change, including within the healthcare field. So for example, in BC, which is where I now live and study, the impacts of the wildfires have hit rural communities very hard, as well as heat waves. And I think that by learning and leveraging some of that knowledge from these rural communities, we may be able to not only help them adapt to the impacts of climate change, especially the health impacts, but also maybe extrapolate those findings to create solutions for all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And thanks for shifting our focus a little bit back to communities that are very close to the changes and the impacts that it has on their health. I wonder, Dr. Deering, if you could tell us, are you seeing these types of impacts with your clients and patients in the urban centers? And how does that, thinking about engagement, like what are some of the lessons that you would share from your experience, and how do we get people motivated to work towards change?
Oh, great questions. So I work with a very frail elderly population, and they, rural communities like Indigenous populations are certainly at higher risk for the impacts of climate change. We're very careful with our folks when it's hot outside, and making sure that they have a cool place to be, making sure that they are well hydrated. But I know that's not the case for long-term care home residents across the country necessarily. And so these are things that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking forward. How are we going to help our vulnerable populations to adapt? How are we going to make sure that they are not adversely affected? I mean, heat is certainly one of the most in-your-face kinds of things, but as Sila mentioned, there are wildfires, and so those get closer and closer to where people live, and so those impacts are significant. And then there's the question of air pollution and its association with non-communicable diseases. So those kinds of things are the bread and butter of family medicine, and we are in the business of prevention. But how can we work with our patients to prevent diseases that are caused by breathing the air outside, things like eye disease and diabetes and lung disease and heart disease. So these are certainly looming challenges, and we have a lot of work to do. Now, I've forgotten what the second part of your question was.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about how, some of the things that you've shared, all three of you, are demonstrating sort of the massive impact of climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be overwhelming, but how do we get people, like sort of everyone involved or motivated to work towards change?
So I recently read a really great book that I think talks about this really well. It's called Saving Us. A climate scientist, let me just get it, climate scientist case for hope and healing in a divided world by Katherine Hayhoe. So she is a climate scientist. She's Canadian, but she works out of university in Lubbock, Texas, of all places. And her book really talks about just this very thing. How do we engage people in conversation? And she says, you're not going to agree, and everybody's not going to agree on the issue. Some people don't believe that climate change is a thing. But you have to start with things that we have in common. We all care about something. And so start there. Have that conversation about things that you both care about, whoever it is you're having conversations with. And then, when you find that common ground, you can continue the conversation and invite people into a conversation. She relates a story about a time when she was talking to an executive at a big fossil fuel company. And so she's a climate scientist, and she was talking to that guy. And so she was thinking, well, how am I going to have a meaningful conversation with this person? And so she started the conversation by saying, I'm thankful for fossil fuels. And I think we can all probably say that in all honesty, because fossil fuels have enabled the lifestyle that we now have. That doesn't mean we have to be married to them for the rest of eternity. And that opening enabled them to have a meaningful conversation. They started with common ground. And I think that's what we need to have conversations. We need to be talking to people. And that's the other thing that I really took from that book was one of the most important things that we can do is to just keep the conversation going, and just keep engaging people in conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Deering. Elder Paulette, you've told us a little bit about your speaking and your efforts to engage more and more people in this issue of climate change. Can you tell us what's your experience of the progress that we're making and where we should be shifting our focus?
Well, progress is not really happening. It's slow. And change needs to start in your own home.
Mhm.
And 35 years ago or so, when I decided to go back in the bush to build a log house, and I'm going to heat this house by wood, and that's exactly what I did. So you minimize the impact on the earth. Right now, it seems that that the political leaders, there's an upheaval of politicians and where they're at. There's the right and there's the left. There's the right that wants to continue the fossil fuel, bring it to the world for more money, but people don't think that wind turbines, solar energy, hydrogen into the ground will create energy for them. So they're missing all that. And so when I look at where I've been, to listen to politicians hurts my ears. And they're just talk. But people that are really on the ground, that are exposed and impacted by climate change, people here in the north is very delicate and climate change, and there's things happening around us that we can change. But to go and tell a politician or the oil companies, that's another story.
Mhm. Yeah, and so what I'm hearing from all of you is that it really is about engaging individuals at a level where this issue is impacting them. Dr. Deering, could you talk a little bit about patients and maybe how they can start to see this as an issue as well? Like, how do we start to shift the way that they think about healthcare systems and setting different priorities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we definitely need to engage our patients in this conversation. And I mean, taking the example of the meter dose inhalers, our family doctors, when they've been having those conversations with their patients and saying, this little thing that you've been using for however long, it has the same impact as just one meter dose inhaler, the same impact as driving a car almost 300 kilometers. But there are other options. Those patients are eager. They're excited to be able to make a small change that has a measurable difference. So again, it's just about having those conversations, but there are so many other things. I think the pandemic has really taught us that we can do things differently. And so the whole question of virtual care and being okay with having a visit with your doctor over a video platform or by telephone, it could be seen as lesser care, but it also could be seen as a way of caring for the earth because you are not traveling, to go and see your family doctor. That's not to say that you don't ever need to go and see your family doctor. Don't mishear me on that. Certainly, there are lots of reasons that we need to have face-to-face conversations. But yeah, just having those conversations and helping educating our patients about the impact that their preventing chronic diseases can have, that being okay with virtual care and having active living and all of those kinds of things. Every small conversation is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea that the awareness piece. So often, if we forget to open up the conversation or even have it, that we don't realize that we are on the same page in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
There's I want to continue on with that in a bit, but there are some questions coming up in the Q&A. One in particular that I think I will maybe direct to Elder Paulette. So one of the audience members is talking about Sela's reference to increasing heat in rural weather, and also Dr. Deering's reference to vulnerable populations. So there's some critical areas of concern, and there's linkages between pollution and equity issues. So in disadvantaged communities, maybe we can discuss a little bit more. What are you seeing in your community, and how does it impact, in terms of health equity?
Well, as I said, we need to elders, people that live out in the country, we need to bring their stories of what you see and witness on the land, and they're doing that. And the community is being on the land, like we have an annual 2 or 3 fish camps or cultural camps in the bush. People seeing what is happening to our fish, with the birds, migratory birds. We're studying that, and we're seeing very, very some abnormal sickness in the fish and the birds. So I think the people living on the land must come forth with the stories, so we can identify what is happening, and we can identify what needs to be changed right there in the community. So I am part of that, and hopefully the traditional knowledge and science can come together and work together.
I think that's a really important point to pick up on, is this idea of people not only understanding like how this impacts them personally, but then feeling empowered to talk about it in a way that is, comfortable for them. Like everybody needs to be involved in the conversation. So beyond awareness, people need to be able to express what this means to them, and to have that sort of impact future decision making, and impact the way that we are running health systems, the way that we are organizing care. All of those things are important, and if we can see this sort of shared impact of climate change, I think solutions are there, right, in terms of our own ability to make decisions and deliver care in a certain way. I'd be really interested to hear, Sela, Dr. Deering has talked a little bit about how in her organization and with her colleagues, this issue is becoming more and more apparent. So with your cohort, what is the awareness of climate change and healthcare as an issue? And when you move into practice, how do you think that will manifest in terms of your choices for places to work and areas that you want to be working in?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Kimberly. I think that my cohort of, medical students are very much aware of the impacts that climate change will have on our lives generally, as well as on our practice, just given that youth are a group that will be disproportionately impacted by climate change, given that we will have to deal with it in the future. I have to say that I feel as though, although like the medical school curriculum is moving towards incorporating aspects of climate health into it, which is something that I really commend it for, I think that there's still a huge amount of gap with respect to how we're taught to handle climate health issues such as overheating, so something a little bit more acute, as well as chronic issues such as environmental exposure to certain contaminants secondary to, I guess, like pollution. I think that in terms of how that will impact my practice in the future, right now I'm doing everything that I can to learn about how climate change will impact my patient population. And I would really encourage any medical students in the webinar here today to do the same. But I am also really trying to push to include more, I guess, climate health in our medical school curriculum so that it's not something that we would have to do as individuals as like extra work, but is in fact integrated as part of our healthcare system, which is something I think it should be.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sila. It really points again to this idea of individual action, but in a collective sort of direction, right? And I really appreciate that. I'm just going to go back to the Q&A, and there's another question here, and maybe I'll direct it to you, Elder Paulette. So within the traditional paradigm of health and healthcare, climate change is sort of seen as an outlier, like, you know, that it's not really part of that system. And I think you've seen that, you know, you talked about politically, it's maybe a bit of an outlier too, or people aren't willing to commit to it. So how do we, or our, you know, experts address this challenge for all of us?
Well, there are mental health issues that are on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
That's given, that's taken. And a lot of it is dealing with loss of who we are as a people, loss of culture, loss of our spiritual connection to the land. And one thing that is people dying of cancer every other week. And that the cancer is on the rise. In Fort Smith alone, just in the last 4 months, there must have been 6 cancer deaths.
Mm-hmm.
And where is that coming from? Elders can point to the water, to the air. So that's there. But there is very little database research, and we asked for that. We're making reference to these traditional camps. We open up these migratory birds, there's worms in them. We open up the bird, like the chickens, there's worms in them. We open up the fish, why is that liver green? So we have more questions than answers. But again, right now they want to dump tailings bomb, the sewer at the Fort McMurray plant into the river. What is that going to do? That's going to kill the environment. But the politicians do not want to move on it. Do not want to. We are addicted. We don't want to talk about it. But there is a lot of issues. But mental health is a huge issue here in the north. The other one is respiratory health. I know of 3 or 4 people that have died of respiratory issues. Lungs are weakening. So there are all these events that our people never had to deal with 50, 60, 70 years ago. But now it's on the table.
Yeah, it just makes me think a little bit as well around, you know, what is the challenge? Like, how do we define that? for healthcare systems and healthcare administrators. Like, so maybe I'll open it to either Sila or Dr. Deering to talk about, why is it important now? Elder Paulette is talking about all these things that are impacting at the community level that communities are feeling, very strongly need to be dealt with. But moving towards, now we can say COVID endemicity and co-op commitments, and there's more motivation to build resilient health systems. How would you define the challenge? How should we be presenting this to health systems and health administrators?
Boy, that's a big question. I think we as as I said before, I didn't feel like I had a voice, but I think we have to recognize as healthcare providers that we do. We also have to recognize that we are responsible for a significant contribution to the problem. Andrea McNeil and her group in BC published a study in 2018 that tried to quantify just how big that impact is. And they concluded that the healthcare system in Canada is responsible for about 4.6% of all greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. So that is a significant impact. It also means that we have the potential to make a significant change. When they looked at where that impact came from, they found that it was largely from, in addition to metered dose inhalers, the supply side, the procurement of all of the goods that we use in healthcare, the food that doesn't get eaten and gets thrown out. So there are many opportunities within the healthcare system to make changes. So how do we bring that to the attention of the people that can actually make those changes? I mean, I think there has to be both influencers at the top, the policymakers, the CEOs, the leaders. There also has to be a bottom-up kind of change. So we need people like Sila and the medical students and the residents that are really passionate about climate change and about its impact to be raising their voices and saying, we are not getting enough teaching on this. You need to change. You need to make it happen. We need family doctors. We need specialists who are speaking up and saying, why do we need to provide a plastic bag for patients when they arrive for their surgery? Why can't we tell the patients, bring a duffel bag so we can put your stuff in there? That was an example that my CEO gave the other day at a talk we were having. So we need both. We need the policymakers. We need the government to be mandating change. That has been happening in places like the National Health Service in the UK. BC, I think, is leading the way in a lot of these things. And maybe, Sila, you can speak to some of those things that you are seeing. Andrea McNeil's Planetary Health Lab out there, I think, is doing amazing work. So we need all of those things to push the healthcare system forward. Healthcare systems are slow-moving machines, but we do have a voice, and we can make those changes happen.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think that, do you think part of the reason that some of this change isn't occurring is out of fear? Like, I can imagine that systems don't want to change because they're worried about the perception of making those types of changes. So what is, part of the solution to that? Does the conversation need to be broadened? Like, how do we get, that kind of change to occur?
That's a good question. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of inertia for sure. There's a lot of inertia, and there's the cost question. So anytime we're gonna build a new building, we there's this huge upfront cost, and everything always seems to cost more than you expect it's going to. So if you're going to build climate resilient or say net zero buildings, that cost is going to be exponentially more. Do you bear that cost now, or do you say, you know what, we'll put it off and we'll just build what we need now, and then but anticipate that in 20 years you're going to have to be doing an expensive retrofit. So it's a challenge because there's a lot of short-term thinking. Governments are only in office for 4 years, so they make their plans around that. So I think that's where we the people, if you will, have to bear the responsibility of keeping those things up front and maintaining pressure to make sure that those kind of changes happen now and are not put off.
Yeah. I just want to go off on that a little bit as well with Sila. Maybe I saw you nodding as Dr. Deering was talking about some of the things that we could do differently in healthcare systems. What's your sense of what the indicators are that we would be making progress? Like when you move into the healthcare system, begin your practice, what are some of the things that you will be looking for that will signal change for you?
Oh man, I think that measuring how successful we are at protecting our population from the health impacts of climate change is pretty complex and a really interesting question and something that I've been reflecting upon. And I have to say that I think that a really good indicator for how successful a society is how well it is able to take care of some of its most vulnerable populations and assure that there is good healthcare for all. And I think that with the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, it was a crisis situation that I think may be similar to future crises that are secondary to our changing climate. And I found that it was something that really demonstrated how adaptable we are. I guess like as a healthcare system, for example, in BC, telehealth changes that we said would take like decades occurred overnight. And I don't know, that makes me very hopeful for our ability to change as a healthcare system. But I also think it really revealed areas where we really need to be able to do better in future crisis situations. And I think that taking this as a learning opportunity will be critical for, I guess, moving forward for future health crises, such as those that'll be a result of climate change. And I guess with respect to like direct measurements, I think that as a healthcare system, we're pretty good at collecting and presenting data. But I think that when it's not disaggregated and we aren't really capturing what's happening to certain communities, then we are unable to make evidence-informed decisions that will serve those communities. So I guess in terms of the metrics, I'd really like to see, I guess, a more nuanced lens with respect to how we are gathering that information and then using it to make change.
Yeah. That's one thing I want to highlight is each of you have spoken about data and access to data and are we collecting the right metrics? I think it's a big question and, obviously having more voices in that conversation will be helpful as well. It needs to be really driven by ultimately the patients, right, who are accessing care and feeling the impacts of climate change and looking for ways that they can be supported in having that impact. So I'm going to go to the Q&A again. There is a comment. One of the audience members is thanking Elder Paulette for making the point about integrating the insights of traditional knowledge and current medical or health education and how critical that is as a necessity so that health or healthcare is for all communities everywhere, and that we need to be aware of the links between health and the climate crisis. I wanted to really, maybe I'll hear from all of you as one of maybe the last things that we talk about is what, you've talked about some of the challenges, Elder Paulette, with getting your message across, and even though you're sharing that climate change is having an impact on you and your family and your community on a regular basis, are there things that give you hope in this conversation?
Well, today, Canada continues to talk about reconciliation. And they need to look at themselves. To reconcile takes two or more people. But for Indigenous people, we are missing Mother Earth, Earth Mother. If you want to move forward, governments, humans need to reconcile with the buffaloes that they killed off, the waters that they are polluting, the trees that they are taking off, mining, the whole gamut. Because the Mother Earth is impacted just as much as the humans. So I've learned that at a young age, to make amends, to reconcile. When we travel the water, we are thankful. We provide tobacco, we provide this for medicines. That's part of reconciliation. Sometimes people laugh because they're hugging the tree. And this human is reconciling with this tree, but people laugh at that. They make fun of that. Now, people need to just stop doing that. And people just need to reconcile spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically. It has to have balance. Balance. If you miss out something, then it's not holistic. That's the thought that I have.
It's a really powerful thing to think about, the work that we have to do individually, and we've talked, about the impact and then the motivation. But I really appreciate that insight and the teachings around, the idea that there are all these areas that we have to do work in, that it's not just a one, shot that will fix it all. I also really want to recognize the idea that we know when things are not right, and to act on that, sense that we have, and to really try to determine where that's coming from and how to find balance again. Can I turn to you, Dr. Deering, and just give you an opportunity to respond to that? Are there things that give you hope? Are there things that are happening that make you feel optimistic about our ability to impact this change?
For sure. There's certainly, it can be very overwhelming and seem very discouraging, when you look at the data. If you read through the IPCC report from this year, it can be very discouraging. And so you have to look for things that can give you hope. There's small things like the swallowtail butterfly caterpillars that were on my dill last spring. And then I think about in advance of the COP last year in Glasgow, the fact that over 45 million healthcare providers around the world signed a document advocating for healthcare to be a focus, and climate change impact on healthcare need to be driving the motivation for change. 45 million healthcare providers around the world. That gives me hope. That, you know, I'm not alone. There's lots of people, passionate people in my city, in our country, around the world who are all pushing in the same direction. Those are the kinds of things that give me hope.
That's fantastic. I have this vision of, you know, every individual sort of coming together in that, you know, in their actions and what that means, right, in terms of us being able to achieve what we're setting out.
Yeah.
Sila, do you want to talk a little bit about what gives you hope? What are some of the innovations potentially or things that you're seeing that provide you with a sense of hope?
Yeah, I guess like echoing Dr. Deering's statements, I feel as though sometimes it can be really overwhelming to look at the statistics and to have an understanding of how much our planet is going to change over the next couple of years. But I have to say that the beauty of intergenerational relationships and coming together to, I guess, address this issue has given me so much hope. So many of my mentors who I really respect as physicians and as professors and just professionals, I think, have like created so much space for myself and other young people to discuss some of our concerns with respect to climate change, and have taken like our words quite seriously and have like done what they can to, I guess, address this issue. And yeah, I think that it's very beautiful when people from all walks of life are able to come together to, I guess, like deal with something that will impact us all. And yeah, I think that like human interaction and our capacity to take care of one another gives me a lot of hope, and I think will be what allows us to get through this.
Thanks so much. I feel like I'm just going to do a quick check of the chat and the Q&A. So there's great. That's really great. There's some references in there to some the metered dose inhalers. So there's Cascades is currently looking for care providers interested in climate conscious inhaler prescribing. So there's a link there for those that are interested. And we've got some other comments. Again, just thanking Elder Paulette for sharing that really comprehensive and, you know, the integrated view of healthcare from a traditional perspective. I think everybody has done such a great job of talking to us today about, you know, what the challenge is that's in front of us, and with some really clear examples, really helpful for people to start to imagine, you know, where they can have an impact. You've talked in different ways about the principles that should be guiding us, you know, as we move forward and tackle the issue of climate change in healthcare. And I think, you know, we've got some good ideas about what should come next and how we can think about tackling the issues. What's really inspiring is we've all talked about individual actions, but about the sort of human component of the problem and how important relationship and connection is. This idea of being able to trust each other and work together is one of the, you know, the bigger things that I think you've all mentioned as a way to address the issue of climate change and health. So I really just want to thank you very much for the excellent and engaging discussions. I feel like we could, if we had another hour, we could really get into some interesting areas, but I hope that the audience members found this session informative. There will be, as I mentioned earlier, within the week, there will be a follow-up with the webinar recording. And we are also really looking for feedback from audience members. It really is helpful for future webinar design. So if you could just take a few moments to provide some feedback on today's session. There will be 2 polls on your screen, and they will be pasted soon, and you'll be able to see them there. I also would like to thank our panelists, Elder Francois Paulette, Sila Rogan, and Dr. Susan Deering for their contributions today. And of course, you know, to the audience for joining us. I'm going to ask Elder Paulette to close our session with a prayer this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. Elder Paulette.
Thank you. Just before I close, the name Selah, this young lady, in my language, Selah means my cousin. I just wanted to share that with you. I just want to thank the Heavenly Father and the grandfathers, our ancestral people that have guided us through all these hardships. So we continue as we move forward the ceremonies that have helped us along, so we can be spared in time of hardships through climate change, forest fires, floods, all of these things that are impacting our very lives. I just ask the Creator to grant His blessings and pity us as we move forward, so that we can become spiritual people to protect our very existence with the water, the earth, the plants, the medicines, everything that has sustained us for thousands of years. And just ask the grandfathers to continue to guide us along this path of healing, this path of reconciliation, not just amongst humans, but amongst the earth, Mother Earth. And today, in spirit and heart and mind and body, in balance, thank you so much for your participation, Masi.
Let's see, Elder Paulette. And thanks again to our audience and our panelists, and a special thanks to HEC for hosting the webinar and giving us an opportunity to explore these issues and offer some perspectives. Again, just to remind people, if you can take a few minutes just to give us some feedback on 2 short poll questions that will come up. There they are, the poll quizzes, and yeah, we'll close off for this morning. So thanks very much to all the panelists.